Hi, this is a presentation for the paper CiteSee, Augmenting Citations in Scientific Papers with Persistent and Personalized Historical Context. My name is Joseph Chang, and this is a joint work with Amy Zhang, Jonathan Bragg, Andrew Head, Kyle Lowe, Downey, and Dan Weld. In this work, we explore how to help scholars explore inline citations when reading research papers. Scholars rely on inline citations to navigate to prior work relevant to the current paper. In fact, a prior study estimated that more than 1 in 5 paper discovery during research are through these inline citations. Even though reading about inline citations is important, most prior systems focused on designing bespoke paper discovery interfaces that is separate from a user's reading process. So what are some interesting user challenges when using these inline citations? One fundamental challenge is that when you're reading many papers for a literature review, different papers that you've read often cite some of the same prior work. But it is difficult for a reader to become aware of the same citations across papers. For example, these 3 reference lists from 3 different papers actually contain many overlaps. And it can be even harder when reading the body of the paper because inline citations to the same paper often have different surface form or different reference numbers across different papers. One popular design that can help with this is in situ paper cards that allow readers to click on the inline citation and quickly see more context around it. However, it can still be difficult for readers to prioritize which of the many inline citations they should explore. Additionally, it can be hard to keep track of your exploration process during literature reviews. For example, when you open a new paper, trying to figure out which inline citations were papers you've just read or which ones are already saved in your library is not an easy task. Some of these issues also exist in other domains such as web browsing. For example, web browsers visually augment hyperlinks so that users can tell which links they have already opened in the past. In this paper, we explored the question of how should a personalized paper reading interface visually augment and contextualize inline citation in a personal way to help scholars conduct literature reviews. Based on exploratory interviews, we came up with 3 design goals for a system called CiteSee. First, we want to help readers discover inline citations to papers that are unfamiliar but relevant to their readings. Second, we want to help readers keep track of familiar citations they have already explored. And finally, we want to provide personalized historical context around each of the inline citations to help readers make sense of them. Here's a short video of the CiteSee system. CiteSee is a Chrome extension that takes over the default PDF reader in your browser when you open a paper. When you open a new paper, you can see a summary of how inline citations in the paper relate to you personally. For example, the number of citations in this paper you have also cited in the past, or how many were also cited in other papers you've recently read. CiteSee also visually augments the citations with overlays atop of the PDF document. When opening a new paper, instead of seeing many inline citations in reference numbers particular to the current paper, you see them visually augmented based on your research history. Clicking on an inline citation also brings out a paper card. In addition to general information about the paper, like title and abstracts, CiteSee also shows you personalized context. In this case, it showed me that I have cited this paper before in my own paper, also included the titles of my paper and the citing sentences in them. This way, it reminds me how the cited paper in this current paper relates to my personal research interest. To overview, CiteSee visually augments inline citations in 2 categories. First, for discovery, it uses different shades of yellow highlighting to help readers prioritize which inline citations to explore. Second, based on your reading and publishing history, it augments paper that you have already explored or familiar to you, such as papers you visited or saved, or papers you've cited in the past. To help readers discover relevant inline citations, CiteSee highlight re-encountered citations that are cited by multiple papers you have recently read. The shade of the highlights are weighted by the number of citing papers in your reading history, and also further weighted based on your engagement on the citing paper. Please see the paper for more details. In the paper cards, CiteSee shows the list of citing papers and the citing sentences to help readers make sense of why the cited paper is relevant to their interest. Based on these contexts, the reader could either click on the paper title to open it, or use the bookmark button to save it to their paper library. Here's an example to give some intuition behind re-encounter citations. A reader conducting a literature review on how to build text analysis system might read a paper about aspect extraction on customer reviews. However, while all the inline citations are relevant to this paper, not all of them are relevant to the topic of the literature review. For example, here, citations to the e-commerce and marketing papers might be less relevant. The opportunity here is that readers typically read multiple papers during a literature review. For example, reading a second paper on sentiment analysis on news articles can allow CiteSee to identify inline citations to papers more closely related to the topic of interest. For example, paper around NLP techniques and data sets. Beyond discovery, CiteSee also highlights paper that may be familiar to a reader. Similarly, the paper cards for familiar papers also show additional personalized context. For example, if a reader saved a paper from using the paper cards in another paper, CiteSee shows the citing sentence where you decided to save it, so that it reminds you why you saved it in the first place. For evaluation, first is a lab study that focused on our re-encounter citation mechanism for discovery. The lab study simulates a literature review task. First, we prepare 3 topics and ask participants to choose one that is the most interesting for them to ensure engagement with the task. These are sourced from real-world paper collections such as leaderboards or reading material from a graduate level course. Participants then read the title and the abstract of the 3 pre-selected paper under that chosen topic to build up their reading history. We also ask them to write down a short description of the common theme as their literature review topic. Finally, they read the introduction and related works section in each paper with the goal of discovering additional relevant papers. When reading the intro and related work sections, some of the inline citations are highlighted using 4 different strategies. We compare our re-encounter strategy to 3 baselines. First is the global baseline that highlights the 5 most cited inline citations. The second baseline, we assume linear reading and highlight the first 5 citations in the paper. The third is a stronger baseline where we use a scientific paper embedding model called Spectre, and we highlighted the 5 citation in each paper that is most similar to all 3 papers by averaging. As the participants read the papers and encountered each highlighted inline citations, they used a 5-point Likert scale to rate them based on this description. This paper is important for understanding the theme I wrote down. If I were to write a literature review article, it would be important for me to read and include this paper. To compare the 4 conditions, we pooled the top 5 citations selected by the 4 strategies, and we simultaneously highlight all of them in the 3 papers. When participants were rating the highlighted citations, they did not know which strategies they came from. Finally, we fit a cumulative link mixed model to compare the 4 strategies. Here are the coefficients of the ordinal regression model. A positive coefficient that does not cross 0 is a positive correlation between the strategy and the participant's rating. Based on the model, we found that the re-encounter citations were rated significantly more useful by the participants compared to the 3 baselines. This suggests that by considering users' reading histories and the citations, CiteSee can better predict which inline citations are more useful in a literature review session. We also conducted a field deployment study where we evaluated the full system in real-world literature review tasks. We recruited participants who were planning to conduct literature review and asked them to install CiteSee on their personal computer for 2 weeks. We recorded their behavior during the deployment and conducted a post-interviews to collect qualitative feedback. Based on the logs, participants were actively using CiteSee for a wide variety of literature review topics. We also found evidence that they frequently saved highlighted inline citations to their paper libraries, more frequently than previously reported on average. After the study had concluded, we also found that 4 out of the 6 participants continued to use CiteSee voluntarily for more than 2 months. This indicates real-world benefit of CiteSee. We recorded and coded the post-interviews. Here are some representative quotes that show some insights about how participants use CiteSee for their own tasks. First, when exploring inline citations to discover relevant papers, participants found both the CiteSee highlights and the global citation counts to be useful but for different purposes. For example, P2 said that global citation count was seen as a proxy for paper quality, and the CiteSee highlight showed them how relevant an inline citation was to their personal interests. P3 additionally said that they relied on CiteSee highlights more than the global citation count as they continued to build up their reading history. Participants also used the familiar paper augmentations to keep track of their exploration. P5 said, I like it when I save something, it turns into a different color so that I know which citations were already saved and which needs to be considered. Finally, participants also compared CiteSee to their current practice and saw benefits in providing additional personalized context around citation. P3 said that, I think CiteSee changed my workflow in a good way. I can immediately get context for citations and find relevant things to say. Please see papers for additional qualitative findings from the post-interviews. To conclude, we present CiteSee, a novel reading interface that leverages a reader's reading and publishing history to visually augment inline citations with personalized historical context. CiteSee helps readers both prioritize exploring citations to unfamiliar but relevant papers and also keep track of explored citations that were familiar to them across papers. We conducted a lab study that showed CiteSee outperformed 3 baseline for paper discovery and a deployment with the full system that showed different benefits of CiteSee for improving real-world literature review tasks. Thank you.